people in. That'll take a minute or two here.
Yep. I'll keep admitting people, Frank, but you can probably get going.
So welcome to Bar Talk. This is a meeting that we do on Zoom, generally monthly. And we try to invite a guest. Today it's going to be U.S. Attorney Darcie McElwee. So we'll hear from Darcie in just a minute, but just a couple of MSBA items. The number one thing I want to remind people about is that we have our summer bar conference in Bar Harbor at the Harbor Side. That's June 15 to 17. The room block at the Harbor Side, we checked it yesterday, and the good news is that it's almost full, which means that we're going to have strong attendance, I think. The bad news is if you don't have a room, you really should call the Harbor Side if you want to stay there and make sure the room block doesn't get taken up. Obviously, there's tons of hotels in Bar Harbor and other options, but we get a pretty good rate at the Harbor Side, and it's one of my favorite hotels. So if you want to stay there for the Summer Bar Conference, please do click on the link or give them a call and book your room. You can see some other items here, MSBA items on the slide that Angela put up. Golf tournament October 3rd at Augusta Country Club with the Maine Society of CPAs and Maine Medical Association. And the next Bar Talk will be on May 10. If you have ideas about folks we should invite here to talk to us at Bar Talk, please send those to Angela or I. We're always open to ideas about who you'd like to hear from. So we don't have a lot of time, and we have a very interesting guest today. And so let's go right to Darcie. Darcie, what I was thinking is that we could talk a little bit about your backgrounds, your biography, which I think is a great story. And I'm sure people would like to hear about the process of becoming a U.S. attorney and what that's like. I haven't seen a lot of media coverage on that, and I'm sure people would like to hear about it. And then at the end, we could talk about your priorities as U.S. attorney. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background, your roots, how you became interested in the law, sure, and those first formative jobs you had that have kind of informed your career.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for having me and for calling or Zooming in today. I am a county girl, so I'm from Caribou, Maine. I was born in Portland when my dad was in law school. My mom put him through law school as an English teacher at Scarborough High School, where ironically my children will go someday. But I grew up in Caribou, so my entire formative years were in Caribou. I'm a Viking. My blood runs maroon. Frank is a Wildcat, and so we're going to keep it polite and respectful today, but
we'll do our best.
Outside this arena, Frank and I are rivals is the kindest way to say it. But Frank's a Wildcat through and through, but we've known each other since we were kids as well. So I grew up in Caribou, and during my formative years, my mom continued to be a teacher. So she was an English teacher at the high school for my entire childhood. And my dad was, he started in private practice out of law school in a small, really tiny two-man practice in Caribou. But my first memories are at the DA's office, where my dad was the district attorney for 10 years during my most formative years, I would say. And those are memories I have of, back in the day when the expression used was legal secretary. I definitely played legal secretary more than most. Trying on shoes of the people that worked for my dad. And of course, that was a time when none of the lawyers were women. So any woman that worked for the office was either a victim advocate or a secretary. This was before the days of paralegals. And so I very much enjoyed watching my dad in the office and his engagement with law enforcement and victims. And I remember vividly the first time I saw him in trial, and watching the judge and the interaction between him and other people in the community who I knew. It was a small town. And I remember watching the jury watch him. And I remember thinking at that time, Frank and I laughed about this a few minutes ago, but I'm not a quiet person, never have been. And I definitely have always been, I'm an only child, and, most of my childhood was spent around adults. So I was probably one of those obnoxious kids that always wanted to have everyone's attention. And so theater and the idea of theater was appealing to me. And I remember thinking as a young person that a trial looked a lot like a theater with, some real human interest and some real impact on someone's life. And that was really appealing to me. And I loved the idea that you could do something that would be fun in your day, and that having those skills would be great to hone, but that the consequences were important and meaningful, and that it was an exercise in helping your community. And at the same time, I then later watched my father in private practice, where he would represent people. And so I had an opportunity to see in a really small town, in a really small legal community, the impact that one attorney could have on a number of other individuals. And I found that looked really compelling. So from a very young age, I thought, well, I think I'd like to be a prosecutor too.
So like at age 12?
Yeah, definitely. And I also told you, Frank, too, when we talked earlier, my mother was a high school English teacher who had a red pen and worked around the clock, it seemed. And I thought, well, that doesn't look like fun. That looks like a lot of hard work. And so while I definitely had a lot of influence from my mother in terms of how I learned to speak and write, I definitely followed in my dad's footsteps from a very young age. And I remember identifying in high school that was something that I wanted to do.
So in terms of high school, if you're willing to, would you mind talking a little bit about the Potato Blossom Festival and the pageant, and kind of your first experience as a public figure in Maine?
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly a public figure in Aroostook County.
Totally. Yeah. So it's hard to talk about sometimes without people giggling, because it is one of these things that if you don't really know what it is, or you think you know what it is, it maybe seems like it's not very serious. Growing up in Aroostook County, though, which you, I'm sure, would confirm, it is taken very seriously. And so it is part of the Maine Potato Blossom pageant and experience is part of the Miss America program. And so it's all for scholarships to go to college or graduate school. And you have to perform a talent, and you had to, back in the day, wear a bathing suit. Thank God that's gone. You don't have to wear a bathing suit anymore. But I'm dating myself because I did have to wear a bathing suit. And so long story short, you sign up to participate in a program for your individual town. So, there would have been a Miss Presque Isle and a Miss Caribou and a Miss Fort Fairfield and a Miss Holton. But that program then funnels into this Potato Blossom Week, which is a festival in July in Aroostook County, which if you haven't been, you absolutely should take your family to. It's very entertaining and fun. And this, of course, is back in a day when, my mother was the daughter of a potato farmer. It was taken very seriously that if you wanted to participate in this, the goal was to become the potato queen, because you would be the spokesperson for the entire potato industry at the age of 17 or 18. So as a senior in high school, I did compete in that. I did prevail, and I was able to then work in my first year of college, traveling around New England representing the Maine Potato Board. And so I spoke to the Maine legislature. I spoke at the Big E in Springfield. And these are things that I had these incredible opportunities to do as a very young girl. And it absolutely gave me confidence and skills and poise that I still use today in the job that I have now. And so it was really something that helped build my confidence, I think, and my interest in public speaking from a young age.
And if folks on the phone have never had the opportunity to travel to Aroostook County, around the time of the Potato Blossom Festival is a great time to go. It's really iconic, stunningly beautiful in my mind, the fields and the forests.
And it's warm and beautiful, and there's a fun parade and mashed potatoes.
And the bugs aren't so bad that time of year.
Exactly.
So we can segue, I think, into your college experience, law school, and then you've been a lifelong prosecutor. So those first jobs you had.
Okay. So my first kind of job of consequence, I would say, moving on from like the dairy bar that Frank and I both worked at, things like that, because I have dirt on him too. So, but I would say my first kind of substantial job that had any sort of relationship to the job I have now was to work as a summer intern for George Mitchell in Washington when he was the Senate Majority Leader. So I spent a summer in Georgetown in the summer before Bowdoin and law school. So I went to Bowdoin in Brunswick, which is in everyone's maybe backyard here on this call, but for a Caribou girl was really far away. So I attended Bowdoin College and then would come home in summer in Caribou. My first job away was to go to DC for that summer, which was an extraordinary experience because not just because George Mitchell is such an incredible man, but because he was the Senate Majority Leader. And so I spent the summer, working between the Russell Building and the Senate Capitol Building. And it was a really great opportunity experience to see how government worked and to have such an incredible representative for our state to work for. After that, I immediately went to law school. I didn't get into the law school I wanted to go to. I wanted to go to Maine Law, which is where my father and many of his friends attended, but I didn't get in. And so I'm very impatient. And I knew, as you pointed out from a young age, that I wanted to be an attorney. So I just applied elsewhere and I went to Franklin Pierce for a year in New Hampshire. And then I transferred back to Maine. And so during law school, I did work for Terry Garmey's firm, which was then Smith Elliott Smith and Garmey for a summer, doing products liability and medical malpractice work, which was a nice exposure for me because I had only ever before that worked in my dad's, small practice. And so I had great exposure to both the DA's office as a kid. And then in my high school and college years, my father, to pay for Bowdoin, had gone into private practice. So he was a sole practitioner across the street from the DA's office. And so I also had the opportunity to see what it was like to represent people in our community and to help people who are in crisis and struggling with substance use and mental health issues. And so that was a really nice exposure for me. In addition to, if you want to talk about it, my father's own struggles with substance abuse, which were very public. So after I worked that summer for Terry, I then, in my final year of law school, was a Cumberland County District Attorney intern working for Stephanie Anderson. And that's such a great experience because you get to actually try cases and you get temporarily admitted to the bar as a student. And so that just confirmed for me what I had believed since I was a teenager, that this was the job for me. I very much enjoyed it. I loved the interaction with defense counsel and the police and victims. And so I found that to be really rewarding in a way I had hoped I would. And so when I graduated from law school, I applied to all the 8 DA's offices around the state to just hope that anybody would hire me, and was willing to go anywhere.
And when you say applied, it's not like they had posted job openings. You just wrote to all the DAs, if I remember correctly.
So yeah, it was interesting. I wrote to them all, I think halfway through that first year, because I was just so into it. I thought, well, I got to get my name out there and show my interest early, because I had heard through the grapevine in the office I was in that the legislature was considering funding, which today sounds so wild and generous, but was considering funding a new ADA position for every office. So I thought, well, there's going to be 8 new jobs out there, so I've got to maybe get ahead of this. So I wrote a letter myself to each of the 8 DAs and showed my interest in working for any of them and traveling, to any part of the state to work. And then they did fund it in like the last 2 months of our law school career. They did fund that. And so I had a couple of interviews with several of those DAs and ended up being hired by the one Bowdoin alum, which is Chris Almy up in Bangor. And I then spent the next 3 months sitting at a table. You can't see my table, but I'm at a little tiny circular table, a little table in his office, sitting right at his elbow and taking in everything that is Chris Almy like a sponge. And learning how to actually charge cases and what you're looking for when you're reading police reports and how to engage with police and how to engage with victims. And I just learned so much. I was there for 4 years and I just had the time of my life. It was an extraordinary opportunity to try hundreds of cases. I was in court every day, all day. It was fast paced and I liked it. And I remember opening to one jury while the other jury I had just finished closing to was deliberating in the room next door. Like, it was a busy time. And that was just right up my alley. It's just something I very much enjoyed. But then after 4 years, there was this announcement following Columbine that the U.S. Attorney's Office was looking for a prosecutor to do school gun violence related issues, not trying cases, not prosecuting, but actually doing community outreach in schools around the state and working with superintendents and administrators and teachers and police to try to figure out what was causing school gun violence, because Columbine had been such a national tragedy. And so each of the U.S. attorney's offices, of which there are 94 across the country, got a new position. And I was hired by then Paula Silsby, the first female U.S. attorney. And it was a job in Portland, and I was happy in Bangor. I lived in Bangor, and but I got that job, and I came down here, and I have been here for 20 years.
So that first job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, as you mentioned, was not in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And so how did that transition into your eventual role in the U.S. Attorney's Office?
So I would say it was a tremendous impact on what I'm doing now, because that was the first couple of years where I just spent all my time making connections with people throughout the state. And so of course I already had, connections to folks up north in Caribou from where I grew up. And then I had the connections in Bangor and Piscataquis County from my work as an ADA, because those two offices cover all the way from, Milo and Millinocket all the way down to Newport and then across to all of Piscataquis County. And so what it allowed me to do was to make further connections throughout the state in a completely different environment and a programmatic responsibility, which is a lot of what I do now. But I did miss courtroom, and it wasn't so busy a job that I couldn't do both, or at least I didn't think I couldn't do both. So at some point, maybe 6 months in, I let it be known that I would love to get into court if possible, even though I knew that wasn't my primary responsibility. And it definitely at that time was the beginning of a program that would later last still into today, which is called Project Safe Neighborhoods, which is it then was an anti-gun violence initiative. It's now just a general anti-violence initiative, not so laser focused on firearms. But at the time it was all about firearms. And so I morphed myself into expanding my portfolio a bit and doing firearms cases. And I was almost exclusively working with ATF for the better part of 10 years in the beginning. So from doing the schoolwork and programmatic responsibilities, I slowly kind of began to specialize in firearms and domestic violence in particular, which is something I had been interested in the DA's office as well. That was a time in our world where domestic violence was just starting to be talked about, where I have a vivid memory of one of my juries telling me in Bangor that the reason they hadn't convicted on what I thought was a very strong case was because it just wasn't their business. And so, what happens behind closed doors? And that was in 1999, 2000. So, so much would then later develop in the domestic violence world. And so as I started to work on almost exclusively ATF cases, that expanded to arson and bomb cases, explosive cases, which thankfully we have few of, but I slowly kind of became ATF's go-to prosecutor in Southern and Northern Maine, which was nice.
And so you're at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 20 years.
Yes. So I did for the first 10, about 10 gun cases. And then after that, I switched to FBI cases and expanded into more general violence. And so I started working on sex trafficking cases, labor trafficking cases, interstate domestic violence, cyber stalking. And then I dabbled in child exploitation cases for several years when one of my colleagues went out on maternity leave, and found those to be incredibly rewarding. So I would say at the time I applied to be the U.S. Attorney, I had done almost everything except very little white collar and very little drugs. But I had done some immigration, I had done child exploitation and child pornography. And so I had a much broader base by the time I had applied. And I had been here for 19 and a half years when I first applied.
So that's a great segue to the application and vetting process. I think people would be very interested to hear just how detailed and onerous this is.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I'm not complaining, okay? So I'm very happy to be in this chair, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. But doing it during COVID was a drag. The entire process took place in my living room and dining room, and that was really lonely and isolating. And think about applying to the biggest job of your life and you don't really have anyone to talk to about it. It's not like you can go next to your colleague at work and say, so this happened today and this happened today. It was all very somewhat secretive and private. And I would say the reason for that was because I knew a number of the people that were in the process. And so out of respect for each other, we only talked to each other about it. We didn't share what was happening outside that group because one of us was going to get it and several of us weren't. And so at least that was my perspective on it, was that it wasn't my news to share what was happening in the process other than what was happening with me. And so I had never done anything remotely political before. The job of an assistant U.S. attorney is very apolitical. So this is my first opportunity to kind of wear my big fat Democrat flag and wave it proudly. And so the very beginning of the process is to, I will say, it kind of began for me was the day that Joe Biden took the podium and was going to be the U.S., the president. I thought, okay, here we go. And so I, from that moment on, just kind of started focusing on paying attention to when the announcement would come, paying attention to who was going to be on the committee. And I apologize, someone's calling my phone over here. I don't know if you can hear that, but the initial announcement came, I want to say in late December, early January, where we were invited to send a resume and just one cover letter and just 2 personal reference letters, which for a lot of people was a hard task to try to think of just 2 people that you wanted to have speak about you in this process. And so I applied, literally just a cover letter and a resume. I did let a number of people know that I was planning to apply so that if people started talking about it, I would have known. Hold on, I apologize. I'm going to hit this button. I don't know why it keeps ringing. It's never rung that many times in the 6 months I've been in the job. It's a special phone. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some emergency I'm missing, but I'm going to assume there's not. And so I did choose 2 people, one from Southern Maine, one from Northern Maine. One was more of a professional kind of letter and one was a personal letter to just kind of get the committee to know who I was. I did have the benefit of knowing who was on the committee before we applied. So like you may remember, the announcement came out and it lists a long list of people on the committee that were going to represent the 4 congressional delegates to the process. So there was representatives from each of our 4 delegates. And I applied, and I want to say maybe a month went by and I received a phone call on a weekend. I was at Target in line with my children. I remember holding my breath a bit, like hoping nothing would go wrong in that moment. But I got a call from a representative for Shelley Pingree who said, we'd like to invite you in for an interview. And I was given a choice of some slots on a particular day to come. And it was Zoom. So that, I would say, in all honesty, that was the toughest thing throughout the entire process because it was 14 people and it was Zoom. And I couldn't use my work computer because, mind you, I was working as a federal government employee. So my entire process, which was exactly 10 months long, had to be done in my own personal time. And I tend to work late. I'm a single mom, so I work like crazy hours. So I had to do everything from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So I was tired the whole time. But I had this little iPad and I had to just keep scrolling to be able to see everyone during the interview. But I did interview for about an hour on Zoom with the entire committee. And then it's over. Again, I'm sitting in my dining room, so that's a little strange. And then I waited maybe a week before I was told by someone from Representative Pingree's office that I had been chosen as one of 3 people whose names would be sent to Washington. And I was not told who the other people were and how long it would take before I would hear anything else. And so I made the assumption, which maybe I shouldn't have, that every one of us would be vetted by the powers that be in Washington. And so when I got a call about a month later that I was being vetted and could I send in some paperwork, I was thrilled, but I thought that was part of the process. I didn't realize at the time that I was the only one being vetted. And so I didn't have any sort of elation yet. I thought this was just part of the process. And that part of the process was a little unnerving because that's the part where they're looking to learn all your skeletons. And so you get some paperwork and you fill it out and you share all your Facebook or Instagram or anything you have that's online. And you answer some pretty heavy, deep questions about you and your family and your experiences. And then you send it in and you get assigned to a vetter. So somebody from another U.S. Attorney's office around the country or DOJ lawyer. Some people volunteer to be part of the vetting process because so many new nominees will be vetted by the department when there's a change in administration. And so I was assigned to an assistant U.S. attorney who had been with the department for years, who was in New York. And I began talking to him over Zoom. And that's when I would, kind of share everything that there might potentially be out in the world that would embarrass the president or his administration if I were the chosen nominee. And so once you get through that process, and everybody thinks you still look okay, then you start the very long and onerous process of completing a Senate questionnaire, which is a really in-depth document that asks wonderful, appropriate questions, but you have to collect a lot of information about yourself. So I had to go back and find every public speech I ever gave or agenda for any class I taught. I had to find out how many times I've been to the police academy, which as it turned out had been 27 times, and list each of the dates and who was there. And so that was a process, and that took a lot of time because again, I was doing it on my own time. And no one's really supposed to help you with that process. So that took months, and I would send in drafts and they would send it back with more questions, and I would send in drafts and they would send it back. And so at some point we found a final draft, which had, 170 pages of attachments and every article that had ever been written about me or anytime I was quoted in the paper. And at that point, it started to get very real. There was this woman, she's lovely. Her job is to kind of coordinate and administrate all the processes for every person being vetted. And that's 94 US attorneys. And I used to tease, I don't know if you've all seen that, the scene, I think there's one for Seinfeld, and there's also a movie, Meet the Parents, maybe, where Ben Stiller, there's like this lady at the counter at the airline, and she's going like this, and she's like, I picture this woman in DC. She never calls you. She just emails you. Oh, I'm going to change your life now. She just sends this email that says, we think you're going to be the U.S. attorney. And it's just an email. And again, you're getting it, and there's no one around to go like, and scream or excite. And she doesn't call to say, I have great news. She just sends you this email like it's, the bus is leaving at 3. And all of a sudden it's, I'm going to change your life now. And so I got these emails. They set up a White House interview. I interviewed over Zoom with representatives from the White House, from the Department of Justice, from EOUSA, which is the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys. And after maybe 4 of those Zooms, then I was finally given the opportunity to meet with the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, for what was to be kind of the final interview, where she would have to meet me face to face, and then I presume say yes or no to the fact that the White House had identified me as the one they were going to nominate. And then after that, I just remember getting an email that said, we will be announcing your nomination tomorrow at 6 p.m. And at that point, I waited. I started getting calls from the press even before that was announced. So clearly people had connections that already knew behind the scenes, but I was to say nothing until that nomination was announced, and it was announced on August 10th. And then it took a long time to get put on the agenda for the Senate confirmation. And I was finally confirmed on October 7th, and I was sworn in by Judge Levy on October 8th.
October 8th. So it's been about 6 months.
Yeah.
Before we talk about your job as a U.S. attorney, it is 11:30. We talked about this before. You don't mind staying on a little bit past our.
I don't mind at all. Yeah, no,
and
I
so,
don't want to outwear my welcome, but I'm happy to talk as long as you need.
You couldn't possibly. So you've been in the job for 6 months.
Yeah.
Tell us about the experience so far and what your priorities are going to be as U.S. attorney. Great.
Thank you for asking. So it definitely has been everything I thought it would be and more. I've been in the office for 20 years, so I knew, I had been through 4 U.S. attorneys. So I had an opportunity to see some really great people in the position and to emulate the things about them that I thought worked best for me or worked best for the office. It has been, I would say, slightly strange, but delightful to continue to work with this incredible group of people that I really respect and care for. Because I was never a supervisor in the office before. So imagine being here for 20 years and kind of seeing what you think works and what doesn't, and more importantly, hearing from your colleagues what works and what doesn't, and then being able to implement real change that increases morale and makes people feel more valued and appreciated and respected and trusted. And so that part's been incredibly rewarding. Where I think people thought that would be the hardest part, it really hasn't been. I, of course, have to deal with personnel issues that I've never dealt with before, and that part's tricky. But again, I care about everyone here so much that it's been good to be involved in those decisions. So promoting my colleagues was a lot of fun. That was great to make choices of who I wanted to be on my team and representing the office, people who I knew had worked hard and who were like-minded in terms of what I wanted to foster for an environment here in the office. And so that kind of speaks to what the job's been like internally, but externally, I've tried very hard to be as visible as possible and to just get out in the community and to meet people, to talk to all law enforcement partners across the state, local, and federal, and tribal, and to just learn to do much more listening and much less talking. Spent 20 years talking. Now I just want to hear what others have to say. What does our office do wrong? What needs to get fixed? What's been a frustration for people over the years? What doesn't work that could be changed? And what is happening in the state that really needs the platform that I can provide in terms of bringing visibility and awareness to certain issues or problems that I can help convene or facilitate discussions and bring the right people to the table. So it's been extraordinarily liberating for me to kind of come out of a line position where I really just had to kind of serve at the pleasure of the current U.S. attorney, and then to have the ability to be the one. I'm still having a hard time getting used to it. Like someone will come in and say, we need a decision on X, and I'll say, okay. And my initial reaction is to say, and what does everyone think, which I think is important. But I still forget that I'm the final decision maker sometimes. And that part's very, very exciting. It's a huge responsibility though, and I'm really loving it, and I'm loving kind of learning what kind of leader I want to be and what my most significant priorities are while I'm here. I would say in a very general way that while I have to align my priorities for the most part nationally with the Attorney General and the President, they have both been really great to give us a lot of discretion to see what works in our district and what our unique problems and concerns are. And many of them are the same in general ways. There's no question that we live in a district with a significant opioid crisis. We are coming out of this pandemic with more mental health issues than we've had ever before, and that's across the board. So our local and state law enforcement partners are seeing considerable depression and death around them every day, which is really affecting the way they do work. And we're seeing staffing shortages and lots of mental health issues with law enforcement as well as a result of kind of the convergence of the pandemic and the epidemic at the same time. And so it's dealing with those issues and trying to offer force multipliers from our federal partners. But I definitely think that one of the best things I can do in this short window of time, I have to assume that I have in this office, that what I really would like to do is work to bring visibility, not only to the work of the office, but to the work of our partners that we all do so well together, because Maine is an extraordinarily tight-knit legal community and law enforcement community. And there are lots of things that the U.S. Attorney can do that they haven't done before. And so I'd really like to have those things become second nature, that when I am replaced, the next person comes in and says, oh, that's what's expected of me. The U.S. Attorney is expected to attend this event and is expected to speak out on this event. And so I've enjoyed working with the Attorney General's office and all of our state and local law enforcement partners and partners across the state to try to increase that visibility and use that voice and platform to do good. With that said, I also personally very much want to focus on those communities and populations in Maine who aren't having voices, who haven't been heard, and who have changed. There's a considerable amount of new Mainers and underrepresented and marginalized populations across Maine that need a voice. And the Department of Justice, of course, speaks for all of them. And so hate crimes and cyber crimes involving threats to people who just generally do not feel safe simply because of who they are, who they love, how they look, where they're from. Those are all really significant priorities for me. And I've really enjoyed working with the defense bar and the civil bar to try to identify those populations and reach out to them as often as possible. That's something that I want to do more of. And I'd be thrilled if anyone on this call feels comfortable reaching out to me independently to identify a group or program that you think would benefit from attention by the department. And so generally speaking, I would say the majority of our cases that we're trying to bring the most attention to are those that I mentioned of sex trafficking and hate crimes, cyber crimes, and white collar crimes where significant individuals have been getting away with things for many years. If there are agencies that are taking advantage of programs and laws, then we want to have a strong voice in those. We definitely want to keep our eye on issues related to domestic terrorism and things that came out of the January 6th event. With that said, it seems, at least at a local level, to be better than it was when I applied. There were a lot of concerns around that time, obviously, having had the January 6th event just occur. And then the other thing that I want everyone to know about, and I try to take this opportunity to tell people whenever I have any audience, as a result of COVID and isolation and mental health and Zoom school, we're seeing a significant trend in increased child exploitation of young teenage girls in Maine. There are significant numbers of girls who are online that weren't online before. They are being exploited at a greater level because of the access that predators have to them online now that they're on the computer more than they were before. And I think the isolation and mental health issues and depression that came from being isolated during COVID are just exponentially increasing risk to some of those girls. So while all kids are vulnerable online, in particular, we're seeing an uptick in Maine. So I just say that to make sure folks are aware of it when they're dealing with their own families and other families, the families that they work with in their jobs, that this is something that we want to bring awareness to. And I'm happy to talk about anything else that you'd like me to.
Well, thank you so much, Darcie. If people have questions, keeping in mind that Darcie is speaking in a public forum here, we'd be happy to entertain them. Or if people want to submit a question via chat. Angela, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. I received this question, Darcie. An important role for the U.S. Attorney's Office is to prosecute civil rights cases under federal law. Can you discuss your office's policy on litigation involving the Americans with Disabilities Act, including case selection criteria for filing ADA cases? And there's a secondary question. Is there any ADA litigation currently pending or recent settlement agreements that you can discuss?
I don't believe there's any pending yet. I know there's some being investigated, and those I can't discuss. And I'm new to the civil world in this new role, which has been really exciting to me, frankly. I am so impressed with the work that our office is doing in this world. And as I'm learning more, and including all the work that all of you do in the civil arena, I'm aware of 2 investigations that are ongoing that involve the ADA and practices involving the ADA, but they are not yet charged of cases. With that said, I haven't had brought to me in the first 6 months any cases involving settlements that are recent that involve the ADA. It's just these 2 pending cases. But in terms of how they're selected, it's my understanding that they come in almost exclusively from agencies or from individuals who report them in a more global way to the department generally, and then they get fielded up here. So someone might complain about a particular facility or a practice that's being engaged in that's in violation of the ADA at a national level, and then the department will look out to see what agencies might be within our Maine borders, which of course we just cover the District of Maine, which is all of Maine. And so if there are facilities in Maine that are engaged in practices just locally or nationally that are part of a larger, systemic problem, they'll send us those as a referral through the department, through the civil division of the department. And they're farmed out to our office, and they would come to our civil chief. I recently promoted Andrew Lizotte to be our new civil chief in this district. Andy is an attorney in our Bangor office. And it's just last week that announcement was made. And so it comes to our chief, and the chief then decides who's going to work on this case and who will it be assigned to, whether it's him or someone else. And then it's given to one of the other 5 lawyers in the office that are part of the civil division. And then it doesn't usually come to me for some time after that, unless there's a particular issue that they need. And I don't usually get involved until the tail end when something's going to involve settlement, which has not happened in one of those cases you've described yet.
I received another question. Is it essential to have a prosecutorial background to work in the USAO?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my path is, laser focused, but no, we have a number of people in our civil and criminal departments, both parts, and our appellate, who were not prosecutors first, who worked in law firms first. Sometimes people have dabbled in working for the department, maybe at a young age out of their career in part of the honors program, which is, I highly recommend. Just in general, that's a great way to get into the Department of Justice across the country. But most of our civil practitioners did not have any prosecutorial experience. Sometimes folks will be in criminal and switch over to civil and vice versa in the other direction, which we've had people do, including Andy, who I just talked about. And then often we'll get, in fact, right now, I want to put a shout out. We have 3 openings in the office right now in civil, appellate, and criminal. And just in drafting our announcement the other day, we were talking about that very issue and making sure we steered away from language that suggested you had to have a prosecutorial or DOJ background. Sometimes it's necessary for certain job fills that we're looking for, where we need someone, as we call them, kind of plug and play. They can just come tomorrow and start right in because they come from another office. But often in civil and appellate in particular, we're looking for folks who have a broader experience.
Darcie, people can find those job postings where?
USA Jobs. Okay. Or you can, I could send it to you, Frank, if you want, and you could send it out. I'd be happy to send you the links, but USA Jobs would have all 3 of these new announcements on, and I believe they're all 3 open still right now. And I'm limiting myself too much. We have a criminal one here, which is it's positioned to do almost exclusively drug cases, because we had a drug lawyer go down to the National Advocacy Center for a detail, so he'll be gone for 2 years. But we have an open civil job, we have an open appellate job, and we have a 2-year position in Bangor, which is criminal. And we're announcing that, I think, later this week.
If you send us a link, we'll include it in the supplement. Which
that would be great.
I'm sure you get inundated with applications.
It depends on the time. It depends on the time. This is a really tricky time right now, I'll be honest. In the past, I remember when I applied to work in the office, there was a trend for like decades where we would get like 300 applications for any open position, because there was much less turnover then, much less. People would stay for, 30, 40-year careers. COVID has changed people's perspectives. And so I'm finding there's issues related to retention and working for the government, and what can we offer you that the private sector can't, which is sometimes nothing, because the private sector post-COVID is more relaxed and there's more remote work and there's more telework. But I am excited to say that I instituted the first telework policy the office has ever had in the history of the office a couple of weeks ago. And so we are expanding greatly as a result of COVID. So we've made some great changes. But depending on the timing of the job announcements, sometimes we get hundreds and sometimes we'll get less, more like 50. But I'd be thrilled to have your organization look these over and see if you have people in mind, because it is always really nice to hire within the state.
Darcie, thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it so much. Good luck in your role as U.S. Attorney. And go Vikings, I'll say. Just
look at you. I am so excited that this was recorded.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. So we'll see you on May 10th.
Bye.